On this episode of the Sacred Playgrounds podcast, we've got camp directors from across the country in different denominations and connections that we met at recent outdoor ministry gatherings, conferences, the Campfire Collective conference and the Lutheran Outdoor Ministries conference. So we sat down with them and got some perspectives on 3 key questions on what's going on in outdoor ministry. Welcome to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast, where we turn numbers into stories and data into insights. We dive deep into theology and research, paired with practical wisdom and action steps to help camping ministries thrive. I'm your host and producer, Jared Rendell, a camp enthusiast and part of the Sacred Playgrounds team. This podcast features Dr. Jake Sorensen, a scholar, author, practitioner, and the founder of Sacred Playgrounds. Be sure to subscribe, submit a question to us to be featured on the podcast, and click that support button to help make these episodes happen. Find us on Facebook and Instagram at Sacred Playgrounds or at sacredplaygrounds.com. Wonder with us what God might have in store at your sacred playground. Hey, welcome to the playground, everyone. Jared here. Jake isn't, with me sort of in person right now because really I'm just here for a moment to set up some of the great conversations we had with some new friends, some friends that we are in ministry with, that you're in ministry with. Lots of folks over the last few weeks or in the weeks and months ahead are going to be attending conferences for their different kind of associations and different camp connected organizations. So we got to go to a couple of these last week. Jake was in around Baltimore at the Lutheran Outdoor Ministries conference. I was in Lake Tahoe with the Campfire Collective annual conference. And so we love sitting down with directors whenever we get the chance to at these conferences, and we got to do that. So you're going to hear from 4 friends today. They're going to introduce themselves shortly. And we ask them the same questions. And so you get to participate, of course, in this. You get to join in. We want to hear your answers to these questions. We asked them 3. We're going to hear what they have to say. We'd love to hear what you have to say with some of these questions too. We're going to play back the conversations we had. So here we go. We're diving in. Thanks for listening, everybody. All right, so I'm sitting here at the Campfire Collective annual conference with some friends who are going to introduce themselves first, tell us a little bit about themselves, their role, and their camp.
Hi, I'm Hannah Bond, and I am the business manager at Sherbrooke Lake Camp, which is located in New Ross, Nova Scotia, Canada. We are kind of in the middle of Nova Scotia, and we are kind of in the middle of nowhere. We have a 1,000-foot beach, which is a very integral part to our camp, which is really wonderful. And it is kind of like unknown to Nova Scotia. We have beaches, but they're typically with oceans. So to have that much beach for a lake is really, really wonderful. And Sherbrooke Lake Camp is part of the United Church of Canada.
Hi, I'm Kelly Von Borstel, and I'm the executive camp director at Montlore Camp, which is in Arizona. It's in Greer, Arizona, northeastern Arizona. It's not hot. People think that we run summer camp in Arizona. It's in northeastern Arizona. It's in the Alpines, Aspens. So we are in the tallest, highest city in Arizona for a small town. So it's actually very cool in the summer. So that's really nice. Something very unique about us is that in 2011, there was a wall of fire in Arizona, which is the biggest fire in the state's history. And we were evacuated during that summer. We're on Forest Service land. And so we had to work with the U.S. Forest Service to get back to our site just because the flood zones changed and all the land around our property changed. And last summer, 2024, 13 years later, was actually our very first summer back home. So this is a really big deal. And we called it our homecoming year because it took us 13 years to get back, but we never stopped having camp. So we found a way to rent other sites, and we had to travel around a little bit to find sites that would fit all of our needs so that we could bring in our own programming, our own staff, our own supplies, our own cook, our own nurse, right? To kind of keep our entire ministry intact. And so we would travel around a little bit. We were kind of wanderers through the desert, Arizona, right? We got to see some really cool things during that 13 years, some really hard things, really challenging things, but really neat things. So
This is Jake Sorensen. We are at the LOM conference. So, what is your name and where are you serving currently?
I am Amanda Reisner. I serve at Fortune Lake Lutheran Camp, which is in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
Wonderful. And what do you enjoy most about your role at camp?
I really love the folks who come through our outdoor ministry site. I think the work that probably gives me the most energy is working with the young adult summer staff.
My name is Sam Garcia. I'm the program director at Mount Cross Ministries in Ben Lomond, California, which is right by Santa Cruz. If you've seen The Lost Boys, it's in there by Beach Town. I've been there since 2023, and I really love living in California.
Awesome. What do you love most about your ministry role?
Yeah, this is not because I'm the most outdoorsy guy ever. Like, I actually kind of joke I'm probably the least outdoorsy program director of all time.
Okay.
What I really love is the personal transformation in campers and staff, because I had that personal transformation myself. And I think it's really cool that like camps are a place that can facilitate that growth and transformation, but also maybe like the death of the South too. So I really love seeing the growth of the campers as they come.
Those are great stories. It is fun, it's fun to hear. We're on here all the time, right? But just to remember that we're part of something bigger, right? Like we're part of a big old community, and these conferences are so good for that because it's a good time to remember that and feel that. Okay, we have 2 more questions we're going to ask, and one of those is our quick camp question.
Quick camp question.
All right, so here's the question. We're curious on your thoughts, your ideas, your perspectives about what camp might be like. What might be different about camp in 10 years?
All right. Well, some trends I'm starting to see at our particular camp. And so to kind of follow that trend and what would that look like in 10 years is kind of where I'm thinking about this question. And I really think that the vast majority of our campers are not going to be connected to a local church. I think that I'm already seeing that shift. So that's just the natural trajectory of what I'm seeing in the trends, at least at our camp. We offer some traveling day camps. So we go into the city and do some camps to a little more underprivileged areas or just places where maybe they wouldn't normally have access to going to camp. And so through those programs, we're reaching more families too. And then we give them, if they need scholarships and that sort of thing, opportunity to come to overnight camp. And those kids are usually community kids, or just kids from the neighborhoods or the Boys and Girls Club, or, just organizations that aren't necessarily church organizations. And then they end up at our camp. So I think that's one of those reasons. Campers bring their friends. Usually we're seeing that they are, kids that don't have any church background. So I just think that's something to be cognizant of, and that's what's shifting, at least in our context.
So for our camp, for Sherbrooke Lake Camp, there's 2 things that I kind of see changing in the next 10 years. And 2 of them, one is the rustic piece of our camp, which I'll explain. And the second piece is technology. So our camp is very, very rustic. We have 9 cabins, which do not have electricity. They do not have heat. So when you're changing in the dark, you're not seeing what you're doing. Our bathrooms are outhouses, which we call latrines. So they are not flush toilets. We have 1 shower on site, which is for emergency use only. But I think that's going to have to change in the next 10 years because we are having so much feedback and so much parental, I want to say like uncomfortableness from parents. They don't like that their kids are going somewhere where they can't be clean. Now, to say that, we go in the lake, which we have 5 times a day. And I mean 5 times, I probably mean 7. Wow. We go in after every activity. We do a rip and dip. We're in there all the time. So yes, they're not clean to the, standard you're taking a shower, but they're all kind of dirty. So I think, unfortunately for us, that's going to have to change. And the idea of flush toilets, people don't enjoy that. So I think that's really unfortunate for us because, that's what really calls to our camp is the rustic piece of it. But I think we're going to have to change that piece in the next 10 years. And then that kind of goes with the technology piece of we are so remote that we don't have really good service and our Wi-Fi is terrible. The wind blows in the wrong direction and it's out, which is really hard for parents as well because they can't reach their kids. And for a Sunday to Friday overnight summer camp, a lot of parents are very uncomfortable with that. So I think that we're going to have to either incorporate technology in some degree of, really having kids call their parents maybe midweek or send a picture home, something like that. And I see that changing in the next 10 years because technology is coming and it's not stopping. So I think that technology and our rusticness is going to have to change in the next 10 years.
Camp has been changing so much. So looking ahead 10 years from now, what do you think is going to be different about our role at camp?
I've been reflecting on that topic, and it's interesting because it's different and yet it's not at all different in the sense of I really see our role in outdoor ministry to get folks outside experiencing God's good creation. And I know that topic is pivotal to the work that you've been doing. And so it's what we've been about in outdoor ministry from its inception, and that is true for us at Fortune Lake as well. And yet that need feels ever more critical to me as I interact with folks at camp, particularly as I interact with young people at camp. There was a moment this last summer where I went up to one of our most rustic programs. We have a treehouse village where there's no electricity. They cook over fires. And I was dropping in that moment to plug in and to lead a devotion with the campers that morning. These were middle school kids. And I was inviting them to join me in this field and to remove their shoes and to be barefoot in the grass. It was damp. It was early morning. And so it was a little bit uncomfortable. I anticipated that. But what I didn't anticipate was like these looks of shock. Like, you want us to what? And I was thinking, okay, here's these kids who have been in nature for now a half week, really like getting their hands dirty over the fire and figuring out life without electricity. And I didn't expect the resistance to like being physically present with the earth. And so my plan was to invite them into a time of deep breathing and prayer and listening to scripture in that posture of toes wiggling in the grass. And that was like a very real barrier to them, to the extent that a lot of the kids didn't want to do it or started putting their shoes back on before we had finished. And it really struck me that I think for a lot of young people, even a lot of the rural kids who come to our camp who live close to nature every day anyway, aren't maybe encountering it as much as they could or would or should. And I think there's a deep need to be close to creation, to experience God in that way. And I think camp can provide that. And I wonder what other barriers are out there that I'm not anticipating, because I didn't anticipate the removal of shoes to be a barrier to this group of kids, but it really was. And so I wonder how we can create on-ramps to folks to kind of live through that discomfort in such a way that there can be deeper connection with self, with God, with one another, and with the whole creation. So I don't know what that means for Fortune Lake's future, except that I want to continue to lean into that and invite people into those opportunities. And that was really in the most basic way.
Just take your shoes off.
Take your shoes off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's becoming more and more removed from the normal experience of the campers themselves. And so do you see it as more important in that sense?
I do, like critically important.
Yeah, and this one's pretty obvious, but I think solely depending on our Lutheran camps to show up funding-wise and camper-wise, I think we're going to really have to shift to figure out how we can get more people into the buildings and doing fresh expressions there. Even if it's not church groups or camp groups, I think we can really use our space to proclaim the gospel and show people hospitality in ways they haven't seen in other church groups. And I think camp is uniquely situated in a place where we can do that. I studied a children, youth, and family ministry at Luther under Andy Root, so I know a lot about his crisis in decline and the church in decline, and I think we're going to see that in camps as well. I think they're directly impacted, and I think as churches decline, we're going to need to think about how we reach out. I think the big one is we're going to need to figure out how to serve our neurodivergent staff. So I think camp is a place that loves and accepts everybody. I think we're really good at loving neurodivergent campers, but I think we're seeing an increase in numbers of neurodivergent staff, both at the summer and seasonal level and year round, some of whom might not even know that they're neurodivergent, so what that means, and kind of putting more emphasis on how to serve more fully. And the unplugged from home, I'm challenging you on this a little bit. I know it's one of the 5 fundamentals of camp, and that's one of what makes camp, and it's really important. But I think the new generation is going to have a really hard time with that, and they are. I think it's just going to get worse. Finding ways to be okay with still being unplugged from home, but figuring out how to accommodate their need to have, not a pacifier, but to have that comfort while still getting them to try and to enjoy that unplugged from home aspect too, I think will be where we're headed in the next 10 years.
Thanks, you guys. Here's question number 3. So we're curious about a time when you learned something. You learned something from, some kind of experience or external source or resource or whatever it might be. You learned something, you applied that to your work, your ministry, and what that looked like, how that went.
Okay, so the thing I'm going to talk about, it goes back to my intro of being displaced from our site for 13 years and the things we learned during that time, because we were just coming out of that time. And so it's been really nice these last several months to look backwards. And when we were going through it, it was so foggy, right? We didn't know what the outcome was going to be. We didn't know if we would continue to even be a camp ministry at all at certain points, right? We didn't know if we'd ever get back on our site. Our camp alumni and our donors, they were starting to lose faith as well, right? 13 years is a really long time. But one of the biggest things that we've learned and that we did implement really the last few years as we started recognizing what was happening in the shift was before the fire, there was so much focus on our site because our site is really beautiful. It is so beautiful. It's so high up in the mountains. It overlooks a little town. It's such a special place. It's 99 years old. So there's rich history there. They settled in the site because of the beauty. So Montlore is being lured to the mountains. That's how it got to its name, because that's where they felt closest to God, was in this space. The space is just really beautiful, and it means so much to so many generations that at some point the site became the mission in some ways. I wouldn't say the overall mission or the only mission, but definitely a focus on the mission. And so over the last 13 years, especially after the first few years when it was, okay, we're not going back right away kind of thing, we started to really shift on, okay, well, we know we're not going to go back anytime soon, so we can't be so focused on the place because we have these campers who need a home right now and they need a safe place to go and be able to be themselves, right? And so we really started focusing on our mission, and it was a dynamic shift in our board, in our staff. I came on during this shift as well and really got to lean into, well, who are we, right? If we're not a camp with a campsite, which is like, what camp doesn't have a campsite, right? Who are we? When I look back at the things that we have implemented because of this and the intentionality that we have given to our relationships with our campers, that our campers really do say that they can't wait to go home to Montlore, that Montlore feels like a second home to them. And this is when we didn't have a home, a physical location. And that's the language that our campers would use because of the focus that we had put into just our relational side of our ministry and the community building among the campers and the staff. And so I've been reflecting a lot too of just how churches, I think a lot of times at churches, we hear the comments about the church is the people, right? And if we didn't have church walls, we'd still be the church, right? And so I've really applied that to camp over the last several years of, well, I think it's the same for us. And we're actually living that out. We were a camp without our campsite, but we were still this camp, right? And it's been like a really fun thing to lean into that when I realized that too, of like, oh, we get to actually not just say that in theory, we're living it out, right? And so anyway, that shift really did happen a handful of years ago. And now that we're back on our site, it's so fun to be able to just bring the focus of our mission that we have been focusing on. We get to bring that back to this beloved place that has such rich history and is so beautiful. So I'm just really excited to see what the future holds for us with just these things that we've learned through really just hard. It's been a really hard time, right? And we've just learned so much just walking through and just moving one step at a time in faith that, okay, we don't really know what's going to happen, but we just have to keep moving forward, right? And to be able to look back and see so many things that we learned, but that's really the biggest part of it.
Something that I have learned and we really needed to implement at our camp was in 2019, we had learned that the shift was happening in our mission in the churches was that we weren't incorporating everybody. And we needed to open our doors and make sure that our camp was inclusive. COVID happened, couldn't do anything about it. 2021 happened, and we realized that, again, we aren't inclusive. We aren't opening our doors to everybody. We have 9 cabins. 1, 2, 3, and 4 are boy cabins. 5, 6, 7, and 8, and 9 are girl cabins. That's all we've got. So in 2021, we decided that we needed to offer gender inclusive cabins. And this was based off of our feedback in 2019, realizing we don't offer something to everybody. We really shifted and kind of leaned back on our mission. Who are we looking to invite here? We're the United Church. We need to make sure that everyone feels inclusive, involved, invited. And we shifted all of what we had been doing for boys and girls cabins and made sure that we had been able to offer a gender inclusive cabin. So we changed our wording to male spec, female spec, and a gender inclusive cabin. So when parents and campers register to our camp, they have the option of choosing one of those 3 that they feel that they fit best in. And we then changed the dynamic of our 1 to 4 cabins. It can go male spec, female spec, gender inclusive cabin, female spec, and whatever works best for that week that we have of campers and whoever we're incorporating that week. So we had started to implement gender inclusive cabins, and we had really great feedback. Kids felt so welcome. They felt so invited. And really, it's quite funny for our younger kids, for our 5 to 10-year-olds, it was about siblings. They felt like they could go because they could be in each other's cabins and they could sleep in the same bunk, and they could feel like, oh my God, I'm not on the opposite side of the camp from each other. I'm not nervous to go anymore because I can be there. And for our other kids, our older kids, it felt like, oh my God, it's a church camp, but I'm invited. No one's singling me out here. I'm in a cabin with all gender inclusive kids or an ally, and I feel like me and my best friend can go, and we can go in the same cabin, and we can feel invited and accepted. So we really changed the dynamic of how we did that, and it worked really, really well.
Tell me about some wisdom that you gained from either another person or a ministry resource or a campers or parents' feedback that you've applied to your ministry successfully.
Yes. It's interesting because I don't even remember exactly who gave me this piece of advice, but it was a trusted colleague with which I was developing a relationship early on in this role. And I was looking to the future, and I was looking at all of the tasks in front of me, and I was wondering, where do I start and how do I tackle all of this as a leader in outdoor ministry, particularly in a smaller organization where we are a small team. And I remember whoever this colleague friend was said to me, take a breath. You need to give yourself more time. And by more time, they specifically said 3 years. Give yourself 3 years to learn the organization, to learn the role, to listen to people, to discern where the Holy Spirit might be calling, to understand the culture, to understand the space, to get to know the people. And then you might feel as if you have some knowledge to share, some direction. And it wasn't a stand still and don't do anything, but it really was a pause, pay attention, don't be so quick to rush into what you think is the next fix or change. And I remember at that time thinking 3 years is an eternity. I can't wait, I can't sit back. And then yet, when I reflect on that now, I think it really was likely right around that 3-year point where I think our organizationally things were coming together in such a way that we could discern together what it is that our mission, vision, and core values need to be, what needs to be highlighted for us now, where is God calling us, and do some of that harder work about what does need to shift so that we can make more room for folks who might have historically been on the margins. And I think had I not heard about that pause and that length of time, I think I would have been really discouraged in those early years. But I think it was really helpful for me to take it a little slower, to give myself grace as I was learning, to lean into colleagues who were smarter than me, to listen to folks in the organization who had been there a long time.
Yeah, I've got some 3 big ones. My first one was when I was a counselor at Rainbow Trail Lutheran Camp. I spent 3 summers there, and that was great. So Dave Jarvis has been a big role model for me and has really watered my desire to grow into a camp leader. Yeah. And one of the things I really like from him that I quote often is, if it doesn't glorify God, we don't do it at camp. When you hear that, you think that it's like rooted in like prayer or reading the Bible, but as far as in activities. And then I want to take that a step further and I also took your class at Luther Seminary, Theological Frameworks for Outdoor Ministry, studying the history and the origins of camp and what they're rooted in, and looking at what I'm inheriting in my new role and saying, why are we doing this? And so eliminating things that are rooted in white supremacy and racism and getting those out of our camp completely, I think has been really helpful for me, and being able to identify, because I think growing up, I didn't realize that's what was going on. I thought it was just a normal thing to do. And so I apply that lens. If it doesn't glorify God, we don't do it. And then also extend it further socially as well. And then applying, I think we can take the theology of the cross to the camp too. Mm-hmm. So my capstone at Luther was called Youth Group is for Losers. So I would extend that camp is for losers too, for the I think especially as we build our camp staffs, we want these perfect, strong, charismatic people. I think we can turn away I think we can just be more of a reflection of like who we serve and like who we hire too. I think camp can really be where broken people feel connected, and the way the church does. So yeah, I think if it doesn't glorify God, we don't do it.
So there you have it. We're so grateful to get to sit down with the 4 of you. So thank you to Hannah and Kelly and Amanda and Sam. We appreciate you guys very much. And your fellow camp directors too as well. Thanks for the ministry. Happy to be in partnership with you. Before we go, we've got a quick stat of the week.
Stat of the week. Stat of the week. Stat of the week.
Our stat of the week this week, we've got a whole pie chart for you. So this data comes from the OMC Director Survey that came out in 2022. And this survey, the new OMC Director Survey, if you're an OMC camp, just a reminder, it's out, it's launched, it's open. Find it on our website or through your kind of association connections. So again, you can always download the stat of the week graphic and use it in the context that makes sense for you. So here we go. One of the things we looked at was levels of involvement among congregational clergy and congregational leaders during this director survey. Okay, so we've got 3 numbers for you: 18%, 21%, and 61%. 18%, we would describe their involvement in their areas, their local outdoor ministries, as low involvement, meaning it's infrequent or never, and there's few or no individuals from that congregation that are connecting with camp. So that's 18% is low involvement. The largest percentage is moderate involvement, semi-frequent, multiple individuals that are connecting with camp in one way or another, whether it's out at summer camp or during some of the year-round ministries, things like that. So 61% we would describe as moderate involvement. The congregational leaders, the clergy, are that connected to camp. And lastly, 21% we describe as high involvement. So that would be frequent, multiple individuals that are connected to the congregation are engaging with camp in some way. So of course, that just tells us some things about, especially if we've got goals and ideas around the level of congregational engagement we'd like to see at our camps. That tells us kind of where people are at. And the hope is lots of, anytime that we're engaging with folks and learning about how they, what they have energy around, connecting their passions and some things that our camp might be doing. We want to be sort of moving people up the ladder. So there are things we can do for those folks that have really low involvement. That's a little harder. The folks that have some moderate involvement, we have some connection to, we can sort of move them up, give them creative opportunities to engage either more frequently or to include more individuals. And then those high involvement folks, these enthusiasts, as we have described the pastors before, those high involvement folks, they're frequent. They're also the ones who are helping tell that camp story. We want to lean into them. I mean, we know that we want those folks to help tell the story, continue to be engaged, to continue to be connectors for campers and family, and so to deepen their engagement and lean into those folks as well. So again, you can hit share on the whole pie chart there. It's out there. It's in the show notes. You can download it and share it. All right, there you have it, everybody. Thanks so much for listening to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/sacredplaygrounds or at Sacred Playgrounds on Instagram. Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you're getting this podcast. And if you like this content and it's helpful, you can support the podcast by clicking that support button. Our theme music was written and performed by Taylor Wilson. You can find all his original songs wherever you get your music. Learn more about what we're up to and connect with the team at sacredplaygrounds.com.